Bear climbs utility pole in New Mexico. Viral rescue attempts ends in tragic electrocution. A dramatic wildlife incident in rural New Mexico has captured national attention after a bear was filmed balancing on top of a utility pole before reportedly suffering a fatal electrocution. Now let's explore the complete story from every perspective on our AI
Imagine you're
podcast.
driving down a lonely,
Yeah.
completely desolate highway in rural New Mexico.
Oh, yeah, just miles and miles of absolutely nothing.
Exactly. The landscape is wide open. It is entirely empty. And you look up at a high voltage utility pole, and there, dozens of feet in the air, is a massive black bear.
Which is just a crazy visual to even try and picture.
Right. And it isn't just resting up there, it is panting heavily, desperately trying to balance itself on this narrow wooden crossarm while totally surrounded by live electrical wires.
It creates this immediate cognitive dissonance. You know, your brain just struggles to process an apex predator completely isolated in this rigid industrial setting.
Yeah, it really does. And our mission for today's deep dive is to look at the recent highly viral video of this exact scenario.
Right.
But we're looking far past the viral shock value of that footage. We want to understand the biological instincts driving this behavior, the complex, honestly agonizing challenges of wildlife rescue, and ultimately what happens when nature's ancient, hardwired survival tactics collide head-on with modern human infrastructure.
Which happens a lot more than you might think.
Oh, absolutely. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because to truly understand how this bizarre situation unfolded, we need to go to the exact moment of discovery on a very desolate stretch of road.
Yeah, so the initial sighting happens on a Monday near Gladstone, New Mexico.
Okay.
For context, if you are looking at a map, this is about 170 miles east of Santa Fe along Highway 56. And there's this family, Shannon Mullins and her family, and they're driving from Red River, New Mexico, over to Oklahoma.
That is a long, flat drive.
It really is. On a drive like that, the environment is super visually repetitive. It is just miles of scrub brush and sky. So when a large, dark mass breaks the horizon line atop a utility pole, I mean, it demands your attention.
Yeah, I bet. And what's wild is the family's first assumption was actually that the bear was dead.
Right. Yeah.
Like they thought someone had somehow put a deceased bear up there as some sick prank. They actually turned their car around to get a second look because the visual simply did not compute.
It makes sense they'd think that at first.
I think of this as a total glitch in the Matrix moment.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have this massive organic creature entirely out of its element, just awkwardly placed into a highly unnatural geometric environment.
Right. But as they get closer, the glitch gets significantly more disturbing.
Exactly.
Because they realize the bear is panting. It is nervously shifting its weight, just struggling to maintain its footing on a standard issue piece of treated wood, stranded several feet in the air.
Just a terrifying position for the animal to be in.
Absolutely. Because witnessing an animal that usually commands respect and fundamentally relies on terra firma to leverage its size and strength, witnessing it reduced to this precarious balancing act completely subverts our understanding of how wildlife operates.
That's so true.
The bear is highly vulnerable, and the family recognizes instantly that this is an active emergency.
But witnessing the spectacle is one thing, you know. Figuring out how to save the animal from that position is an entirely different nightmare.
Oh, an absolute logistical nightmare.
Which brings us to the 911 call. Shannon Mullins records the scene, and her video actually includes the audio of her speaking to dispatch. And the tone of her voice is incredibly striking.
Yeah, it's very calm, right?
Yes, she states, very calmly, she says, "I'm calling to report a bear on top of a light pole."
And the dispatcher's response is equally surprising. They just inform the caller that state wildlife officials have already been notified.
Wait, really?
Yeah, multiple people driving down Highway 56 had already seen this bear and called it in. The authorities were fully aware of the situation.
Okay, I have to stop you there, because I think anyone listening is wondering the exact same thing. If multiple people called this in and wildlife officials knew about it, why couldn't they just dart the bear?
Right.
Because we see tranquilizers used in wildlife documentaries constantly. You shoot a dart, the animal goes to sleep, and you relocate it. Problem solved.
Well, what's fascinating here is how the physical reality of the environment entirely dictates the rescue protocol. Gravity essentially negated their standard operating procedures because tranquilizing an animal is not an instant process. It takes several minutes for the chemicals to actually take effect in the bloodstream.
Like that.
And during that time, a frightened bear is going to panic, it's going to become dizzy, and eventually lose consciousness. A 300-pound animal falling 40 feet from a utility pole. I mean, it will suffer massive internal trauma, broken bones, or just instant death upon impact.
Oh, wow. I didn't really think about the delay with the tranquilizer. But surely emergency services have catch nets, right? Like fire departments used to use them. You just set up a net at the base of the pole, dart the bear, and catch it when it drops.
That sounds good in theory, but catching a falling object of that mass involves incredibly complex physics.
Right.
A heavy animal falling from that height generates a massive amount of kinetic energy. Standard wildlife nets would likely just tear right through.
Oh, man.
Or, even worse, the rebound effect, the elasticity of the net could violently launch the bear out and into the ground anyway.
That sounds awful.
Yeah, safe netting requires heavy-duty, highly specialized rigging that is suspended high enough off the ground to absorb the shock without bottoming out. And frankly, that kind of equipment is not sitting in the trunk of a standard wildlife officer's pickup truck.
Okay, fair enough. Then what about bucket trucks? The utility company has trucks with those hydraulic lifts that go up to those lines every single day.
You are hitting on the exact logistical bottleneck that they faced. To use a bucket truck safely, you first have to physically locate an available utility crew in a highly rural area.
And Gladstone, New Mexico is incredibly isolated.
Exactly. Then that crew has to drive the heavy machinery to the site. And even if they arrive quickly, they cannot just raise a bucket up to a highly stressed, fully conscious apex predator that's sitting next to high-voltage lines.
Oh, right. Because the bear could attack the workers.
Precisely. The risk to the human rescue crew in that confined space is astronomical.
So the authorities are essentially paralyzed here. They're just stuck on the side of a rural highway, trying to solve an impossible physics and logistics problem while the clock is ticking.
That is basically it.
And while emergency responders were running out of safe options on the ground, the video of the bear was already taking on a life of its own online.
Oh, yeah. The footage spread incredibly fast. The U.S. Department of the Interior actually even engaged with the video on their official social media channels.
Which is pretty unusual for a government agency.
Right. They shared the clip with a humorous caption, writing, "We appreciate the enthusiasm for American energy dominance, but this isn't what we meant."
Yeah. And I want to pause here for you listening. We aren't here to take a stance on how government agencies manage their social media tone. We are strictly observing how this event was processed publicly.
Right. It's about the public reaction.
Exactly.
Yep.
Because there is a severe emotional whiplash at play here. The internet is conditioned to love a quirky animal video. A bear on a pole feels like a funny cartoon setup.
It does.
But the reality for the animal in that moment was terrifying. This was a desperate fight for survival.
And unfortunately, that fight ended tragically.
Yeah.
Before authorities could source the necessary equipment or formulate a plan to safely bypass the electricity and the height, the bear was electrocuted. It died right there on the pole.
It's just so sad.
And following the electrocution, neither the Department of the Interior nor the New Mexico Department of Wildlife provided any further statements or comments regarding the incident. The public engagement just ceased immediately.
Because the joke wasn't funny anymore. I want to break down how that electrocution actually happens, though, because it's confusing. A wooden utility pole is essentially a giant piece of timber. Wood is an insulator, not a conductor. How does a bear get electrocuted just sitting on wood?
Right, that's a common misconception. But a utility pole is far more complex than just a wooden stick. The wood itself provides the structure, sure, but the hardware at the very top is this dense web of conductive and grounded materials. You have the primary phase wires, and those are carrying thousands of volts of alternating current. Then you also have metal crossarm braces, grounded guy wires, and neutral lines.
So there's a lot of metal up there.
Tons of it. And for an electrocution to occur, the bear doesn't just touch one wire. Electricity is always seeking the path of least resistance to the ground.
Right. So the bear has to actually complete a circuit?
Precisely. If the bear touches a live high-voltage wire with a paw and simultaneously brushes against a grounded metal component or even a neutral wire with its nose or its back, its body instantly becomes the bridge.
Wow.
The current travels right through the animal's internal organs to reach the ground. And furthermore, remember, this bear was panting heavily in the heat.
Right. The family noticed that in the video.
Exactly. It was likely sweating through its paws and drooling. Moisture significantly increases conductivity, which lowers the natural resistance of the bear's fur and skin.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, it turns what might just be a slight brush against the wrong components into a fatal arc of electricity.
So it transforms from this confusing, bizarre situation into a highly lethal trap. in literally a fraction of a second.
It really does. And this raises an important question about how society consumes these wildlife crises.
How do you mean?
Well, we process these incidents as viral entertainment, entirely detached from the life or death stakes the animal is actually experiencing. You know, a thumbnail of a bear on a pole generates thousands of shares and jokes about energy dominance, completely masking the biomechanical reality of an animal cornered by high voltage.
The digital framing just completely strips away the physical danger. It's so true. And to truly grasp why this tragedy happened, we have to drop the lens of a viral video and look at that utility pole strictly through the bear's eyes. We need to understand the biology of fear.
Yes, the biology is key here.
Yeah.
Because black bears are anatomically engineered for climbing.
Okay.
From the time they are tiny cubs, their mother teaches them to scale trees at the very first sign of danger. Unlike grizzly bears, which evolved out in the open plains and rely on size and aggression for defense, black bears evolved in dense forests alongside larger predators.
So running up is their best option.
Exactly. Their primary hardwired defense mechanism is vertical escape. They actually have these short, sharply curved claws specifically designed to dig into bark and hoist their body weight upward really rapidly.
Wow. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Think about this from the perspective of that biological instinct. To a terrified bear, a utility pole is not a piece of human infrastructure.
No, not at all.
It isn't part of a regional electrical distribution grid. To a bear, a utility pole is just a perfectly straight, conveniently branchless pine tree.
It is the ultimate refuge in their mind. When that bear was frightened, maybe it was spooked by a loud semi-truck on Highway 56, or barking dogs, or just nearby human activity, it didn't stop to strategize.
Right.
Its ancient nervous system just took over, essentially screaming, "Climb."
It is essentially an evolutionary trap. If we compare the utility grid to a high-speed highway, we've basically built a multi-lane expressway straight through the middle of the bear's living room without putting up any crosswalks or warning signs.
That's a great way to look at it.
The bear runs from a visible threat on the ground, the cars, the noise, and seeks safety in the sky. It is completely unaware of the invisible predator waiting for it at the top.
Right, because high-voltage electricity produces no scent, no sound, and no visual warning that an animal's sensory biology can even detect.
None of its senses tell it that it's in danger.
Exactly. It escapes a perceived danger, only to climb directly into a fatal, invisible hazard.
The sensory mismatch is absolute. The bear's biology has prepared it to handle falling branches, aggressive predators, and steep drops. It has zero evolutionary defense against alternating current.
None whatsoever. But, while this specific combination of biology and infrastructure proved fatal in New Mexico, our sources point out that this is actually not an isolated phenomenon.
It happens more often.
Yeah, encounters like this happen globally, and they do not always end in tragedy.
Right, because the sources highlight a very specific contrast. In Arizona, back in 2021, a nearly identical incident occurred.
Yes.
A bear climbed a high-voltage utility pole. But in the Arizona case, wildlife officials and local utility crews managed to successfully work together to bring the bear down safely. Nobody was injured, and the bear survived. How did they actually pull that off when the New Mexico team couldn't?
Well, the Arizona success story illustrates the massive, highly coordinated logistical chain required to override a situation like this.
Okay, walk us through it.
First, the emergency dispatch was able to immediately contact the local utility provider, and the power company pinpointed the exact sector of the grid and remotely de-energized those specific distribution lines.
So they essentially turned off the invisible predator.
Exactly. They removed the electrocution risk entirely.
But they still have a massive bear stuck high in the air, right?
Right. But once the lines were dead, the utility company rushed a bucket truck to the scene. And because they were in a slightly less isolated area than Gladstone, the response time was actually manageable.
That makes a huge difference.
It does. So wildlife officials actually got into the hydraulic bucket and were raised all the way up to eye level with the bear.
Wow. So they didn't just shoot a dart from the ground and hope for the best.
No, because the fall would still be lethal even without the electricity. By getting level with the bear, they could secure the animal safely.
How did they do that without getting mauled?
Well, in these types of successful rescues, officials often use a heavy-duty catch pole to secure the animal's head and shoulders.
Oh, I see.
Or they might administer a targeted, low-dose tranquilizer at point-blank range.
Wow.
This allows them to physically pull the lethargic bear into the safety of the bucket before it totally loses its grip on the wood.
That is incredibly risky, but brilliant.
Yeah. Then they lower the bucket to the ground, fully sedate the bear for transport, and release it back into the wild.
It requires total synergy, then, between multiple agencies, specialized heavy machinery, remote grid access, and honestly, a healthy dose of luck regarding response times.
Absolutely. The contrast between Arizona and New Mexico shows just how narrow the margin for error really is.
Yeah.
If the power company is 30 minutes farther away, or if the local grid architecture doesn't allow for a localized shutoff, or even if the bear just shifts its weight 2 inches and touches a ground wire before the power is cut, the rescue fails.
It's all about timing.
The Arizona case proves that mitigation is physically possible, sure. But the New Mexico tragedy highlights the default outcome when those complex logistical gears don't mesh perfectly in a rural environment.
We are essentially relying on emergency improvised heroics to solve a fundamental design conflict.
Well said.
So what does this all mean? We started with a surreal image on a lonely highway, but where does this actually leave us?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the undeniable reality is that human development is expanding outward into natural habitats at an unprecedented rate.
We're everywhere now.
We are pushing our roads, our power grids, our telecommunication towers, and our residential infrastructure deeper into areas where wildlife has navigated freely for thousands of years.
Yeah.
Because of that expansion, these bizarre, dangerous encounters between ancient biological instincts and modern infrastructure will inevitably become more frequent.
It forces a necessary conversation about how we design the built environment. Like, we can't just react to a bear on a pole. We have to think about how we engineer the pole in the first place.
Exactly. It challenges utility companies and urban planners to consider wildlife safety proactively.
Are there any solutions out there right now?
There are, actually. There are initiatives currently testing animal-friendly grid designs.
Like what?
Things like installing specialized insulation covers over high-risk hardware or changing the spacing of wires so large birds and climbing mammals can't accidentally bridge the gap and complete that circuit.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
And also creating dedicated wildlife corridors that allow animals to bypass dangerous infrastructure entirely. It forces us to examine how we coexist with a natural world we are rapidly wiring up.
It really reframes how you look at the landscape out your car window. Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave directly with you. Think about the everyday infrastructure surrounding you right now. The things you pass by every single day without a second thought. The chain link fences, the drainage culverts, the cellular towers, the miles and miles of power lines.
Yeah.
If a simple wooden utility pole is perceived as a safe haven, literally a perfectly good tree by a frightened bear trying to survive, what other elements of our modern built environment have we inadvertently turned into deadly traps for animals?
It's a sobering thought.
We are constantly building physical structures that confuse creatures whose survival instincts haven't updated in thousands of years. And if we know that their biology fundamentally cannot catch up to our technology, how much responsibility do we bear to design our world with their ancient instincts in mind? Thank you for joining us for today's deep dive. We will catch you on the next one.
Okay, one question for you. What do you think could have been done differently to save the bear after it climbed the utility pole? Should wildlife officials have attempted a rescue sooner? Or was the situation simply too dangerous for anyone to intervene safely? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.